Hello and welcome to Professor Pincushion. In this tutorial, I'm going to show you how you can incorporate piping into your garment seams in order to add extra detail. Let's go ahead and get started. As far as piping is concerned, you can either make your own piping, and we do have a tutorial called Piping, which shows you how to create your own from scratch, or you can get pre-made from the store. I found this near where the bias tape is kept. Now, if you do the pre-made piping, just be aware that you're pretty much limited in size. This is a really small one and it's a 1/2 inch in width and also in color. You're only going to get the most basic colors. But the nice thing is, because it is cut on the bias, it does have a little bit of stretch to it, so it'll be easier for going around curves. We're going to start off with an easy example first. So I'm just going to have piping on this edge. This is eventually going to be a seam, but instead of putting your piping in, then putting another fabric on top and sewing your seam, the piping always gets sewn to one side first. That way we can make sure of the placement of the piping. Now the problem is, let me bring this back in. My pre-made piping is only a 1/2 inch in width and my seam allowance is 5/8 of an inch for my seam. So if I just place this on the raw edge and sew it into place, I'm going to have a problem when I do my 5/8 seam allowance. It might be on the other side and then we're not going to see the piping at all. In order to prep for my piping placing and to give me a visual guideline, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to take the piece that I'm going to base my piping to and just do a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance in a basting stitch. So I'm just going to do a single layer. I'm not sewing anything together. Just do a basting stitch, whatever your seam allowance is. The basting stitch is the longest stitch on your machine. You don't have to worry about doing any back stitching because this is just a temporary stitch. Let's go ahead and pin our piping to our seam. Now you're going to be pinning to the right side of your fabric, and we need to make sure that the stitches that are on your piping gets lined up with the stitch line of your basting stitches here, because we want to make sure that once we do our seam allowance, this piping is going to stick out in between the seams. The raw edge of the piping is going to be on the same side as the raw edge of my fabric here, but you can see again they're not lining up. We don't have raw edge to raw edge, and the piping should be to the left of my stitches, so that way they're going to be visible once we do our seam. Again, the basting stitch is just a temporary stitch. We're just securing our piping into place before we do our actual seam with our other piece. Now you can see I switched to a different foot. I'm actually using my zipper foot because it can go right up alongside my piping. I want to sew as close to the piping as I can, and also, if you can, adjust the placement of your needle. If you can get even closer, even better. So I'm just doing the longest stitch again, no back stitching. Now that we know that our piping isn't going to go anywhere, we can go ahead and start creating our normal seams. So I'm going to grab the other piece that goes with this, and we're just going to pretend like we're doing a normal seam by lining up the raw edges, the ends, and any notches, and then pin it into place so we can do our 5/8 seam allowance. Even though I'm doing a regular straight stitch for my seam, I'm still using my zipper foot and I'm butting right up next to the piping here. You can also see I moved over my needle so I can get as close as possible to that. And don't forget to do a back stitch. For my seams that contain the piping, instead of pressing them open like my normal seam, I keep them closed and press them towards the center of the garment. So either going towards the center front or towards the center back. Here's a view of the right side. Now, as an option, I'm not going to do it with mine, but what you can do if you want it to look a little bit nicer, is you can do a top stitch right along the edge. Now, you just don't have to do them on both sides. You just do it on the side where your seam allowance is underneath. So you see my seam allowance is on this side, so I would do my top stitch right along the edge here. And if I was to look this side, you see the seam allowance is on this part. So then I would do the top stitch along here. If you create a seam that has a curve, it is very important that you then trim your seam allowance and cut these little notches, which are inverted triangles. Don't cut into your stitches because we don't want to create a hole. You just get as close as you can. So you can see I already did on this side, and I still need to do it on this side as well. This will help the seam lie a little bit flatter once we open this up so we can see the right side. Here you can see an example of some piping work on my bodice. So after you get to a certain point where a lot of your work is done, go ahead and remove all those basting stitches if they're showing, so it'll look a lot nicer in the end. New tutorials are released weekly, so please subscribe to be notified of the next release. Make sure to check out our other videos and visit ProfessorPincushion.com to view our complete library with well over 200 sewing video tutorials, including our exclusive premium content. Our premium membership is only $5 a month for unlimited access and only available at ProfessorPincushion.com. Also, don't forget to download our mobile app for videos on the go. Thanks for watching.